They thought drenching her in champagne would erase her dignity. But in front of the whole world, she revealed a truth that shattered their empire in seconds. The chandeliers glittered like constellations above the grand ballroom, their light scattering across crystal glasses and polished marble floors. Music swirled through the air, elegant and refined, while servers in crisp uniforms carried silver trays laden with hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes. Guests, dressed in their finest gowns and tailored suits, exchanged laughter and gossip, each word dipped in wealth and power. This was no ordinary gala. It was the event of the season, hosted by one of the city's wealthiest tycoons, a billionaire known as Victor Harrow. His reputation was carved from steel and money, his empire spanning continents, and tonight he sat at the head of it all, watching his kingdom revel. In the center of the room, however, a moment unfolded that cut through the glamour like a blade. A young woman, dressed in a flowing ivory gown, stood quietly among the glittering crowd. Her presence was understated, her jewelry minimal, her demeanor poised but not boastful. She was not laughing or vying for attention. Instead, she carried herself with a calm dignity that seemed almost out of place in a room buzzing with arrogance and indulgence. And perhaps it was that quiet dignity that drew the attention of Lillian Harrow, the billionaire's wife. Lillian was a vision in emerald green silk, her gown shimmering under the light like a serpent's skin. Her lips curled in a smile too sharp to be kind, and her jeweled fingers clutched the neck of a champagne bottle. With a flourish, she raised it, her laughter ringing loud enough to command the room. "Let's wash away the dirt with champagne," she announced, her voice slicing through the air. "After all, nothing cleans a stain better, does it?" Her words dripped with cruelty, and before anyone could process, she popped the cork. A stream of cold champagne burst forth, spraying across the ivory gown of the quiet woman who hadn't spoken a word. The liquid sparkled under the lights as it soaked into the delicate fabric, dripping from her shoulders to the marble beneath her heels. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Some guests chuckled nervously, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved to intervene. The humiliation was deliberate, calculated, and it hung heavy in the silence that followed. Lillian smirked, holding the dripping bottle aloft like a weapon, her green dress glowing in victory. Victor leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a faint smile of approval tugging at his lips. To him, this was entertainment, a show of dominance in his world. But the woman in ivory did not flinch. She did not wipe the champagne from her dress, nor did she lower her gaze in shame. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her gown with deliberate grace, as though the soaking insult was nothing more than spilled water. Her face, framed by hair drawn back in a neat twist, revealed no anger, no tears, only composure. That silence unsettled the room far more than if she had screamed. "Champagne is for winners, not imposters," Lillian declared, raising her glass toward the chandeliers. Her voice boomed over the microphone, amplified for every ear in the hall. Some laughed and applauded, while others exchanged nervous glances. Near the buffet, a young server's hands trembled as he set down his tray. He slid his phone from his pocket and began recording, sensing that something far greater than a cruel prank was unfolding. In another corner, an older woman with silver hair whispered to her husband, "This is disgraceful," though her words drowned beneath the noise. Security guards, dressed in black suits, began to shift at the edges of the room as Lillian snapped her fingers. "Get her out before she ruins the evening further," she commanded, her emerald gown shimmering like a queen's robe. Two men started toward the woman in ivory, their footsteps echoing on marble, but still she did not move. Her stillness was a shield, her silence heavier than any protest. She met their eyes unblinking, and for a moment even they hesitated. The young server whispered into his phone as comments flooded his live stream. "This isn't right. Why is no one stopping this?" The atmosphere thickened. Guests leaned in, unsure whether they were watching humiliation or something far more dangerous. The woman in ivory finally reached into her small clutch, pulling out her phone with the same calm composure she had maintained all night. She lifted it to her ear, her voice low but carrying through the silence. "Begin the cancellation protocol. Tag tonight's deal." Those words, simple yet cryptic, sent a ripple through those close enough to hear. The server's eyes widened. "She's not bluffing," he whispered, capturing every second. Lillian laughed, tipping her glass as if to toast her own cruelty. "What, making phone calls now? Do you think anyone here believes you are anything more than a nobody in an ivory dress? Her laughter rang out, but it was thinner this time, less certain. Some in the crowd shifted uneasily, their smiles faltering. The billionaire, once smirking in approval, leaned forward slightly, the first flicker of unease in his otherwise calm eyes, and through it all, the woman in ivory did not falter. Champagne clung to her gown like battle stains, but her composure remained intact. She lowered her phone and slid it back into her clutch. Then she spoke, not loud, not theatrical, but steady and undeniable. "You've just made the worst mistake of your life." The words, though spoken softly, struck the hall like thunder. "You've just made the worst mistake of your life." A hush fell across the room, heavy and electric. Glasses stilled midair, laughter dissolved into silence, and even the music faltered as though the orchestra itself sensed the shift in power. For the first time that night, all eyes were not on Lillian's glittering emerald gown, but on the woman in ivory, standing drenched yet unbroken. Lillian tried to laugh, though the sound cracked like glass under strain. "Mistake?" she echoed, her lips curling. "Sweetheart, the only mistake here is thinking you belong in a room like this. Look at you, soaked, humiliated. You should be thanking me for reminding you where you truly stand." Her words sliced through the air, sharp and venomous, but the crowd no longer responded with easy chuckles. Their expressions were shifting, uncertain, conflicted, even wary. The woman in ivory didn't flinch. She raised her chin, her calm gaze sweeping the room. "What you did tonight won't fade when the music ends," she said, her voice carrying without effort. "It will echo and you will feel it." The murmurs grew louder, spreading like fire across the tables. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances, others whispered to their companions, while phones began to rise higher, capturing every second. The young server's live stream was exploding with comments. "She's not scared. This is power. Who is she? This is bigger than a gala." Victor Harrow, the billionaire himself, adjusted his cufflinks with a movement meant to look casual, but his eyes betrayed unease. For the first time he leaned forward, his smirk dimming. He hadn't spoken all evening, content to let his wife bask in her cruelty, but now he studied the woman in ivory with a sharpness that betrayed recognition. It was subtle, just a flicker in his gaze, but those close enough to see it understood. He knew something. Lillian, unwilling to surrender her stage, snapped her fingers again. "Security," she barked. "Remove her now." The guards, already halfway toward the woman, stopped short. They exchanged glances, their hesitation visible. Authority didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, and the stillness of the ivory-clad woman unsettled them more than Lillian's commands. The pause was brief, but in a room so tense it felt like a lifetime. From the back, an older guest rose from her seat. Silver-haired, elegant in sapphire silk, she spoke firmly, her voice carrying, "Enough. This is a disgrace." Her words sliced through the heavy silence, drawing gasps. Heads turned, whispers darted like arrows across the room. Lillian's face flushed crimson beneath the emerald shimmer of her gown. She gripped the microphone tighter, her voice cracking. "Sit down. You don't get to speak here." But the older woman didn't sit. She crossed her arms, her chin high. "Neither do you," she replied. The ripple of approval was subtle but unmistakable, a small current of rebellion threading through the uneasy crowd. Phones caught every second, their lenses unblinking witnesses to the shift. The woman in ivory finally moved, one step deliberate and sharp, her heel striking the marble like a gavel. Her soaked gown clung to her frame, no longer a mark of humiliation, but an emblem of defiance. Her eyes locked on Lillian's, unyielding. "You think champagne can erase me?" she said, her voice as calm as steel. "No. What it erases is your mask." The crowd stirred, a murmur of disbelief rolling through the hall. Lillian tried to laugh again, but the sound rang hollow, stripped of its former authority. "You're nothing," she spat, desperation tightening her voice. "This is my husband's world, not yours." The woman in ivory let the words settle, as unbothered by them as she had been by the champagne dripping from her gown. Then she tilted her head slightly, her eyes steady. "Then watch his world collapse." The room erupted, not in laughter this time, but in gasps and whispers. The young server's live stream surged past 1,000 viewers, the comments a blur of disbelief and awe. She's in control. This is history unfolding. She's about to flip the whole night. Victor Harrow's smirk was gone now. His face had paled, his jaw clenched, and though he tried to maintain his posture, his hand trembled faintly against the armrest of his chair. For the first time in years, the empire he thought untouchable felt fragile, its weight shifting under the poised figure of a woman no one expected. And Lillian? Her emerald gown glittered under the chandeliers, but the sheen no longer looked like power. It looked like desperation clinging to silk. The ballroom felt like it was holding its breath. Every eye fixed on the drenched woman in ivory, every camera capturing her stillness as though it were history in motion. The laughter that had once echoed through the chandeliers had vanished, leaving behind an electric tension that coiled tighter with every passing second. Victor Harrow finally broke the silence, his deep voice cutting through the room. "Who exactly do you think you are?" His tone was sharp, commanding, but there was something underneath it, an edge of unease that betrayed him. The woman didn't answer immediately. She tilted her head, her gaze burning into him with the quiet fire of someone who knew far more than she revealed. Her silence was deliberate, and the longer it stretched, the more power shifted away from him. Lillian glanced at her husband, sensing the change, her painted smile faltering. Phones hovered higher. Guests whispered furiously. A few muttered that the scene was getting out of hand, but none dared to leave. It wasn't just a gala anymore. It was theater, a stage where masks were slipping. And then from the side of the hall came a voice no one expected. Elena Ruiz, a junior event coordinator, barely 23, stood near the control booth. Her hands trembled, but her words rang clear. "She's not lying," Elena said, her voice strong despite her shaking frame. "I saw her name in the system this morning. Her clearance was marked executive level. She was supposed to be here." The room exploded. Gasps echoed, followed by frantic whispers, then a wave of disbelief. All cameras swiveled toward Eleanor, capturing her every word. The young server's live stream surged with comments. "Proof. Game over. The truth is out." Lillian's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, her voice desperate, venom fraying into panic. "Stay out of this if you want a job tomorrow." But Elena held her ground. "I won't lie, not for you." Her defiance sent another ripple through the crowd, this time heavier, sharper. People who had looked away before now leaned forward, their eyes locked on the drama unfolding. Victor's mask of composure cracked. He adjusted his cufflinks again, but the nervous tick no longer looked elegant. It looked desperate. He stood, chair scraping against marble, and faced the woman in ivory. "If this is true," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of arrogance, "then tell us. Who are you?" The woman finally smiled, not wide, not gloating, but with a quiet inevitability that chilled the air. She stepped forward, her heels striking the marble in steady rhythm. Champagne still clung to her gown, but she moved like royalty cloaked in armor. "You've seen my name," she said softly, her eyes never leaving Victor's. "It's on every document your lawyer signed this month." The billionaire's face paled. His lips parted, but no words came. The crowd gasped collectively, the sound rolling like thunder across the hall. Lillian shook her head violently, her emerald gown shimmering like a fractured illusion. "No," she stammered. "That's impossible." "She's bluffing." But her voice cracked, too brittle, too forced. No one believed her now. Phones rose higher, live streams buzzing with disbelief and awe. "She's the one. Owner-level access. The Harrows are finished." The woman in ivory took another step forward, her gaze cutting through the couple like a blade. "I am the one acquiring your empire," she said, her words precise, deliberate, undeniable. "And tonight you poured champagne on the woman who owns your future." The gasp that followed shook the ballroom to its core. Chandeliers trembled as hundreds of guests leaned forward, jaws slack, eyes wide, their disbelief transforming into recognition. And for the first time in years, Victor Harrow, the man who had always controlled the room, looked small. Very small. The air in the ballroom shifted instantly. What had begun as mockery now tasted like judgment, heavy and suffocating. Phones captured every angle, every word, every twitch of fear that flickered across Victor Harrow's face. His wife Lillian still clutched the microphone, her knuckles white against its polished metal. "She's bluffing," Lillian snapped, her emerald gown glistening under the chandelier's glare. Her voice cracked, sharp but brittle. "Do you really believe this?" "This nobody." She swung her arm toward the woman in ivory, desperation dripping from every syllable. She doesn't belong here. She never did. But her words landed flat. The crowd that once chuckled at her cruelty now recoiled. A murmur spread like fire across the hall. The live stream counter ticked higher, thousands of comments rolling in by the second. She's the owner. The Harrows are finished. This is justice in real time. Victor's jaw tightened, but the mask of command was slipping. His silence spoke louder than his wife's shrill defiance. He had not denied the claim. He had not challenged the words. He had simply gone pale, and that to the audience was confirmation enough. The woman in ivory stood tall at the center of it all. Her gown clung to her like stained armor, champagne darkening the silk into rose-colored shadows. But her poise was immaculate, her gaze unbroken. She didn't shout, didn't raise her arms, didn't need to. Her stillness pulled the room toward her, a gravity the Harrows couldn't match. Then the ballroom screens flickered. The slideshow of glittering sponsors and charity pledges vanished, replaced by breaking news banners in bold red Harrow Holdings plummets. Acquisition deal in jeopardy. Investors pull out. Gasps rolled through the hall. Victor spun toward the screen, his composure unraveling. No, he muttered, shaking his head as if denial could undo it. His wife clutched his arm, mascara streaking down her cheek. Fix it, she hissed. You're the billionaire. Fix this. But Victor's lips barely moved. She can do this, he whispered, his voice hollow. She has the power. The crowd froze. That confession, spoken in defeat, spread like lightning. The Harrows' empire, once untouchable, had cracked open in public view. Lillian's fury boiled over. She wrenched the microphone closer and shrieked, No, this is fraud. This is a trick. Security, remove her immediately. Her words ricocheted off marble, shrill and desperate, but the guards hesitated. Their eyes darted between the trembling wife and the steady figure in ivory, whose authority radiated more command than any shout. And then it happened. One guard stepped back, shaking his head. The other lowered his hands. A ripple of disbelief swept the room. The woman in emerald gasped, pointing furiously. What are you doing? I said remove her, but her voice no longer carried weight. The woman in ivory took a single step forward. Her heels struck the marble with a sound that silenced everything. Touch me, she said, her voice calm, clear, final. And you will never work in this city again. The words weren't a threat. They were a verdict. The guards froze. The crowd erupted in whispers. Phones lifted higher, recording every second. Comments scrolled across the live stream. She's in control. The empire is crumbling. This is history. Victor's face sagged as sweat glistened at his temples. His hands trembled, betraying the panic he fought to hide. He looked at his wife, who raged and shouted, but her voice cracked under the weight of disbelief spreading through the crowd. For the first time in years, Victor Harrow realized he no longer owned the room. He had lost it, to silence, to dignity, to the woman he had underestimated, and the night was far from over. The ballroom was no longer the Harrows' stage. It was a courtroom without walls, and the jury was everyone watching. Phones streamed, comments scrolled, and the weight of judgment pressed down heavier than any gavel. Victor Harrow, the billionaire who once commanded fear with a glance, now looked like a man cornered. His suit clung to him like armor rusting in real time. His lips moved, but the words faltered before they left his throat. Every second of hesitation eroded his empire further. Lillian clung to the microphone as if it were a lifeline. Her voice, once dripping with superiority, now cracked with desperation. You don't understand who we are, she cried. We've built this city. We've hosted presidents, But the audience wasn't listening. The clinking of glasses, the polite applause, the forced admiration, all of it had vanished. In its place was a chilling, unblinking silence. The woman in ivory stepped closer, the ruined silk of her gown glowing faintly under the chandeliers, champagne stains now a badge of battle. Every movement was deliberate, graceful, unhurried. She didn't need to fight for attention. She already owned it. You built nothing but walls, she said, her voice carrying without effort. Walls between wealth and worth, between privilege and dignity. Tonight those walls come down. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some applauded softly, hesitant but growing braver with each clap. Others whispered, recording every syllable, already drafting captions for their posts. Lillian slammed the microphone onto the podium, the sound exploding through the speakers. "You're nothing," she screamed. "Nothing but a fraud in a borrowed dress." The words landed weak, hollow, already swallowed by the tide turning against her. The screens above flickered again, this time revealing legal documents, contracts, transfers of ownership, signatures, the Harrows' names, printed in bold, alongside a final line that confirmed what the woman in ivory had already declared. Effective immediately, Harrow Holdings is under new ownership. The crowd erupted. Some gasped, some cheered, others simply stared in disbelief. Victor's knees buckled, and he gripped the edge of the podium to steady himself. His empire, his fortune, his legacy, publicly stripped away in the very room where he had once basked in glory. Lillian staggered backward, mascara streaking her cheeks, her emerald gown crumpling as she collapsed into a chair. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "No, this can't be real." But reality was undeniable. The woman in ivory turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the ballroom. The applause grew louder, swelling into a roar that shook the walls. The cameras caught every angle, her composure, her strength, her undeniable presence. She raised her hand, not in anger, not in triumph, but in quiet authority. The room stilled instantly. "This isn't revenge," she said, her voice calm and steady. "This is accountability. Tonight is not about humiliation, it's about change." The words pierced deeper than any insult. They carried the weight of justice, the clarity of truth. Even those who had whispered doubts felt something shift inside them. Victor Harrow lowered his gaze, defeated. For the first time, the titan of steel and glass looked human, small, fragile, undone. And in that silence, the woman in ivory walked to the head table, where the Harrows had once presided over every gala, every deal, every display of power. She pulled out the chair at the center, the seat of command, and sat down. The crowd erupted again, this time with cheers that shook the marble floor. History had been rewritten, not with violence or vengeance, but with dignity. The Harrows were finished. The woman in ivory was not just a guest anymore. She was the power this room now recognized.